taking
Are
the
you
floor.
raising up the hand?
I'm the ice.
So next up on our presentation, we're going to have Anna Faherty and Julia Rhinelander with the Franco-American Pathways podcast, archives at the University of Southern Maine and the Lewiston Auburn College.
So I'm just gonna bring up my remarks on my phone so I don't forget what I'm saying, but Julia can
I'm
start.
gonna wing it. Yeah, so welcome. We're not giving as academic podcast as the one, or academic presentation. This is already going south. As the ones that have come before, but we are going to talk a little bit about what we do on our podcast, and actually kind of open it up to talk about ways that we can better serve you as the Franco-American community. I'll say right off the bat, neither of us are Franco-American, like, so we're big fans. Big fans, and hopefully we'll be able to come out of this with more ways to collaborate and to work to amplify the voices of young Francos together. Right. So who we are, Anna?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Anna. I'm the archivist at the Franco-American Collection at USM's Lewiston Auburn College, and University of Southern Maine's Lewiston Auburn College, just in case. And I have been there for about 2.5 years, and it has been like a super fun job, and I've gotten to do a wide variety of things, including this podcast.
Okay. I'm Julia Rhinelander. This podcast was actually really a silver lining of COVID. My sign-on date at University of Southern Maine, which is also my alma mater, I graduated in 2014. Made one of the last people, I think, to get a degree in French from the University of Southern Maine before they cut the department. We can talk about that in the discussion later today. And I moved back home from getting my master's in French literature in Paris in 2019, and I shifted from looking at the PhD to looking at librarianship. I got the job at USM in access services, which is more like circulation. So when my sign-on date was February 18th, so in less than a month we were working remotely. This was last year, 2020. And they said, okay, Joe, you speak French, like we're gonna kind of put you under Anna's wing, and doing transcribing and translating oral histories. And I absolutely fell in love with these stories. And as someone who has a passion for storytelling, stories, history, personal narrative, I really kind of got this idea in my head, and it turns out Anna and I were both kind of on the same wavelength to use these remote hours to come up with a way to use these stories and present them to the world in podcast form. So that's really where this started. My master's was actually focusing on post-colonial Franco-Algerian women's writing, and seeing the ways and the connections that these immigration narratives have taken form in these two seemingly very disparate parts of the world have been really interesting for me personally as well. I think we're ready for the next slide. Let's talk about the podcast. Let's talk about the collection first.
Yeah, so first we're going to talk about the Franco-American Collection at USM. So the Franco-American Collection began in 1972 at St. Dominic's, where Camden works now. It was a collection that began in the community and grew and grew and grew and grew, and it had to move locations several times. And in the late 80s, when they built the Lewiston Auburn College of USM, Madeline Jaguar, who was a professor of sociology at USM, advocated to have the collection brought to the college, and it has been there ever since. So we collect lots of different formats of items, both physical and digital. And these include sort of more typical things that you might find in an archive, like oral histories, photos, diaries, and newspapers. But we also have items that are a little bit more similar to what you might find in a museum, like artwork and textiles, including clothing and snowshoes, and a variety of other items that are really fun to work with. I've lost my place. So to this day, the collection has a very active board of local Francophone or Francophile community members, Camden included. Thank you for being on the board.
Thank you for having me.
As well as one full-time staff person, which is me, and several folks from the USM Libraries Department who help us out, including Julia. So, like Julia was saying, oh, we can go to the next one now. We had the idea to create a podcast before COVID. We'd sort of been like throwing it around. She had her own separate ideas. I had my own separate ideas. And our coworker Maureen had yet even more separate ideas. And then during COVID, we came together and talked about it. And we're like, wait a minute. Now that we're all working remotely, this is something that like we can actually focus on. So that's what we decided to do. We are hoping that our podcast will help us not only educate the public, but also reach out to members of the public who identify as Franco-American, and particularly reach out to a younger audience, and particularly a younger audience of Franco-Americans, because most folks don't know that our collection exists, and I want to help them learn that it does.
It is hidden away. If you go to the LAC campus, you kind of have to walk back towards it. And I will say too, I don't think I need to tell anyone who's ever listened to podcasts is that they're so popular right now. And I know Anna and I actually, when we first met at a breakfast at President Glenn Cummings' house in Gorham on our Gorham campus, that's actually what we bonded over. We bonded over listening to My Favorite Murder and, you know, all of these awesome historical podcasts. So it seems really cool that we're working on this together now. They're so accessible. There's so many possibilities for education and bringing people together. And yes, it draws a younger audience. And that's why we're here. So yeah, excellent. Outreaching out to Francos. As we've heard today, there are so many gaps in the representation of Francos in collections like ours. A lot of our oral histories are ones from folks who grew up in Lewiston kind of during the swan song of this age where French and English were really intermingled in cities like Lewiston. We have a lot of oral histories from people who worked in the mills, who grew up in places like Rumford, which is just north of where I grew up in Newry. And again, I didn't know any of this history growing up in that small town in Western Maine. So we have a lack of young Franco voices at the collection. And from what I gather, this is actually pretty consistent across collections and across academic institutions. The generational and the language gaps, that the common theme that we've heard along here is this. I've heard the words anglicized thrown around a lot. I've heard the word, of course, assimilation thrown around a lot. And what we're actually seeing, like boots on the ground, is that there's a lot of folks who don't necessarily, not only might not know that they're Franco or connect to that history, but not feel that their stories are important. And if there's anything I've learned in the last year of working on this collection, is that personal narrative is powerful. Personal narrative is perhaps the most powerful tool that we have in our toolkit as far as preserving history and preserving culture. And a lot of it, and a lot of this renewed interest that we're seeing here today and in general in this community is so invigorating for us as librarians, as archivists, because I feel like in archives and in libraries, we really work at the intersection of education, community, and advocacy, right? So we're working to advocate for those voices and make sure that they're heard. So I guess the big question that we have, the big rhetorical question is what's next? Not just for our podcast, we've got a production schedule going out. The interest has been amazing, and thank you so many people in this room who have supported us, so thank you so much. But yeah, what's next for us and what's next for you? So our big question coming out of this, and this actually will probably be a pretty short presentation as far as us talking wise, because the big question for us is how can we help you? What can our collection and others like it do better to engage young Francos? We've done a lot. We're about to air our 6th episode, and these past episodes have really kind of been laying the groundwork. We're hoping that we're not just going to be talking to the Franco-American community, but the academic community at large, and putting Franco-American studies on the map as something that is here, it exists, it's a legitimate form of study. I really think that setting the groundwork for introducing people to this history, it's a lesser known migration story, and it's a fascinating one. So we've laid the groundwork, and now that we've kind of established ourselves, we really look forward to branching out and incorporating more of those stories. So bigger questions, what kind of episodes do you want to see us produce? And this doesn't have to be now, y'all. We'll leave our emails and our socials on here for you as well. And kind of something that's really exciting for me is the idea of more events like this where we can get together and talk about these ideas. I know that there is an event, I believe it's called Sharing Our Stories, where librarians, archivists come into communities equipped with recording equipment, sort of these cute little backpacks equipped with recorders, notebooks, pens, for community members to interview each other and get their oral histories. And then they give them to the archivists, librarians, and then they get to put them in their collection and have them as something that they can keep forever, that will, live in infamy. So that's kind of a, yeah.
Sorry, can I just cut in briefly? I think it's important too that we sort of, this is going to sound kind of weird, I think, but that we like normalize people talking about their experience in oral histories, because a lot of people seem to think that, oh, you don't want to interview me, I don't have anything exciting to say, or oh, I haven't done anything like,
especially in the
super
Franco-American
incredible, like, and it's like, well, no, I do want to hear about you, and I do want to hear about your life and what you've been up to in it, and that's something that we also hope to increase, to get more people comfortable talking about their experiences and identity.
And that's just going to be done through peer pressure, I think, is just normalizing this idea that we can talk about our stories and that our stories are important. So that's kind of where we're at with the podcast now. We've got, we just interviewed Steve Rial. He's a poet out of Massachusetts. He read us some of his poetry. It's fantastic. We're talking with, we talked, as I said, in the kind of question I asked after the keynote. We're talking with, we spoke with Emma Boutiette at the Osher Map Library to kind of delve more into this series of mapping of Franco cities and how we map culture on top of landscape. Emma, fabulous Emma Franco. I hope that at some point she's able to attend one of these events in the future. But we've got a ton of stuff on the docket, and we just want more. Is there anything? Okay, so last one is our socials. So we're here to serve you, as I've said. Here are our emails, and I think we'll probably email the presentations out afterwards, and I'm happy to talk with anyone in person after. We've got our socials. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Our website, francopathwayspod.wordpress.com. You can listen to our podcast on pretty much every streaming service I can think of. We distribute it through Anchor, so it's available on Spotify. It's available on Stitcher, Apple Podcasts. And also, I'll need to plug as well, we've been recording at our local community radio station, WMPG, and you can stream them online as well, but they've been so generous in offering us their production room and their space, and we're so lucky to have more and more people on board, and just want to keep the momentum going.
Not only that, but they have an app.
Oh yeah, WMPG has an app. There's
So
an app for that.
you can download it, and then you could even listen to it on there if you want. And it's like a little black icon with like yellow headphones.
So you don't have to be like in Portland vicinity to listen to awesome community radio. Okay, and then I think the last slide is just opening it up to you all. What are your thoughts? What are your ideas? We want to hear them. Yeah.
So, I mean, every podcast is unique and, in terms of finding its voice and its format and, kind of go into the prehistory of this podcast, like, how did you settle on this format? It seems very, it's not a straight interview, even though you do have interviews, it's a lot more narrative, if I can say that. So how was the process of kind of figuring out, like, how do we tell these stories? Like, I'm wondering about the conversations that went on to kind of offer something that's compelling and that feels like more of, hey, we're going to take you on a journey for an hour or so.
Yeah, so for me, what makes us unique is our collections. And I really wanted to showcase that. And so did Julia. And so I had the idea of doing the Archivist Corner where I would be talking about objects. And Julia had the idea to be featuring oral histories that we've already had in conjunction with interviews that we were going to be conducting for the purposes of the podcast. And to me, I think that is what ultimately has guided us in the process. The focus on collections, items that are special because they're nowhere else in the world. And we want to share them with as many people as we can.
And I think too, for the narrative part of it, like I said earlier, and I think that what was so powerful about those oral histories, I mean, think about someone talking about their Christmas traditions or talking about music that they heard growing up, what their parents cooked for them. I mean, there's something magic that happens there that I can't quite explain when you, I guess it's a kind of alchemy when someone's telling their story and it's from their heart and it's their history. And so I think that not just having it be straight interviews was really important because it's in that tradition of telling stories. So when you're especially if you're stitching together oral history, right, I always try and have some kind of, and I do the editing and the production side of things. So having an element of oral history or something that we have an audio from our collection interspersed with an interview from someone in the Franco community in the now kind of makes this connection and makes it lived history, right? I think one of the more recent episodes we did was with Faherty. I was just talking about this with Camden earlier, where we managed to find this awesome recording of a radio station out of Worcester, Massachusetts that did a French radio show called La Française, and talking about French radio in this way, you're making these connections. And I think that though it's more work to stitch together these narrative pieces and kind of guide the reader or listener, literature major, guide the listener on in a way, and also have a format that's structured and predictable. And when you veer from that, to kind of announce it. So our mapping out episodes have been a little bit different, but to have the Archivist Corner and La Collection Pau with our coworker Maureen, who is a native Franco-Estonian, having her actually read excerpts of written documents in French and English has also been a really powerful thing. And it was when we first talked about having this and having episodes be half hour, 45 minutes, we knew we'd be packing in a lot. So I think that's also, it's important to have a narrative to like tighten it up a little bit. And that's, if I can improve like one little thing every episode, then it's good. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Okay. Cool. Yeah.
I just want to say I love this idea so much because I think that it's a great example of French as a living language in Maine.
Mm-hmm.
You're going into a community and talking to people that still speak French today. You're empowering them because as Patrick mentioned earlier, many Franco-Americans, as we all probably know, have an internalized narrative of like that their experience isn't important enough to talk about or to be recognized, right? And even in a lot of history classes in Maine, we don't talk about. I mean, I know when I was in high school in Vancouver, we never talked about the history of Rhinelander state, which of course, in hindsight is just ludicrous. But I think the work that you're doing is extremely important and timely. And I'm just so happy that you guys are not waiting, for someone else to come in and make it happen. Because there's really, in my eyes, no one better to do it than the two of you who are already in contact with archives and local history through the University of Maine Sister in Houston. So thank you for that. And all I would just add is that, as a French professor, I'm always thinking about what I can use in class. And I teach a class called Living in French in North America, and this is definitely a resource I would direct my students to immediately. So I would recommend, letting the public teachers in Lewiston know and the students at the University of Maine, because I can definitely see French teachers using this. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I think that that's been, as far as the narrative structure goes and editorial choices that we made, the vision initially where we had to scale back was actually having a truly bilingual podcast and having episodes available in French and in English, so having 2 of each episode. Needless to say, I think we realized pretty quickly that was going to be a lot more work than we had the capacity for. And there's still that vision, and I think as someone who's studied languages and who is passionate about the French language and all of its iterations, and also aware of how, I want to choose my words carefully, how the English hegemony has made us so accustomed to just being able to fall back on English in any sense. And I think that there is, if you listen, there are some interviews up at the Fort Kent campus, and we did that in French. And any clips that I can find in French, I try and intersperse them, and I'm hoping to find a balance and equilibre to serve our English-speaking Francos, because I'm preaching to the choir. This is so much of your history has been about this assimilation and the loss of that language, and there's still Francos who don't speak French, but there are also a lot of folks who do. And so that's been a piece that I think we're still kind of trying to figure out how to find that balance, and any input there is fine, but I'm so happy that you'll be able to use it for your class, and if you ever want to collaborate, we have to.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to maybe make a similar comment. I really appreciate the way that you're going about this and interviewing people, and it very much is highlighting people's voices and in like a very respectful way. Because I know oftentimes, or not oftentimes, but sometimes when people approach Franco-American history, when they themselves don't necessarily have that background, there's sort of this tendency to try and portray like the Franco-American experience as a sort of like peripheral experience, and what you really want to focus on is France and Paris and lavender fields and Monet, all of which is wonderful.
Yeah.
But it kind of even in French classes in high school, like it was sort of like that. You only like barely ever talk about Franco-Americans, like most people in the class with themselves Franco-Americans. But it's really wonderful to see like representations of real people and telling people that like your experience doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter whether you had little or were told your entire life that you spoke bad French, or that you were just like a small cog in the machine. I think that's really nice to see.
Yeah, thank you so much. And just to speak to that a little bit before we move on, I don't want to take too much more time, but I guess like from a personal perspective, like my study of French started because my oldest brother, my second oldest brother, I'm the youngest of 7 in a very strange mixed family, but he married a French Canadian woman, she's from Quebec, and they got married when I'm the baby, so they got married when I was 9, and that was my introduction to the French language. She has family members who don't speak any English, like some very proud, like some Quebec separatists in there too, was very very vocal about their beliefs, and that was my introduction. I was like, this is awesome. We would go and visit in the summers after my niece was born. I was living with my brother, and then I went on, and my first immersion experience was actually living in Senegal, and then I studied Algerian literature. And so, like, I didn't live in France until I was in my late 20s for my master's. And so, what's so interesting, and I guess this is just to kind of drive that point home, is that there is so much more to the francophone world than is often taught, especially in high schools. And it does come back to that personal narrative. Like the Algerian literature I studied at Siagiva and Marawi, like these are studying their autobiographical and their creative nonfiction really tells us a lot about this place of in-betweenness that can happen when you have this crossover culture and therefore